At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality bikes, which might lead to another discovery. Getting back on the saddle isn't always comfortable. Good news is Sierra has massage guns. And chafe wipes, too. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
Get the Angel Reese special at McDonald's now. Let's break it down. My favorite barbecue sauce, American cheese, crispy bacon, pickles, onions, and a sesame seed bun, of course. And don't forget the fries and a drink. Sound good? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
At participating restaurants for a limited time.
Hello and welcome to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. It's Friday, the 21st of February, and I'm Rich Ferraro bringing you the Friday Five, your weekly roundup of the big stories coming from the City Ground. We will head over to the news desk in just a few minutes, but just worth noting that we are recording this podcast while Billy Davis is doing his show, It Is What It Is, at the Albert Hall in Nottingham, joined by Lee Camp and Terry the Kit Man and Wes Morgan, amongst other people. And we have some of our guys at the event, and they will be reporting back in due course. Now, before we head over to the 1865 news desk, I'll just say hello to season ticket holder and friend of the pod, and someone who you might have heard on this podcast in the past. Welcome, Steve Burns. How you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. And it's always nice to be introduced without the title of Old Man Steve again. So, we'll take that.
That was nothing to do with me. And listeners, if you're confused by that, listen back to Football Terrorists from just before Christmas.
I know my place. Oh,
well, there speaks the father of several children, used to being put down by many people at once. Okay, let's head over to the 1865 news desk and our guest newsreader, Amilka.
Hello, it's Amilka here, sitting in at the 1865 news desk on Friday the 21st of February. Here are the big stories from the City Ground this week. Our first story this week covers the plans to redevelop the City Ground. Daniel Taylor, writing in The Athletic, has confirmed that Tom Cartledge's firm, Benoy, are no longer involved, but also that no formal agreement has been reached with Foster and Partners. The club have distanced themselves from the claim that work is due to start at the end of this season, and it is much more likely that the Peter Staler stand will be demolished and rebuilt from the summer of 2026, with the hope that redevelopment or even rebuilding of the Bridgman stand may follow. Also concerning the City Ground, it has now been confirmed that England's match with Senegal will be played at Forest home ground on Tuesday the 10th of June with a 7:45 kick-off. It will be the first time that England has played on Trentside since 1941, although the ground did host Portugal, Turkey and Croatia in Euro 96. Our third story concerns the governance of the club. Documents filed at Companies House show that co-owner Socrates Kominakis is no longer listed as the director of the club. Speculation suggests that this could be one measure in anticipation of Forest qualifying for Europe in order to comply with UEFA regulations, which prevent clubs with the same ownership from competing in the same competition. Next up, the Forest women's team's cup final date against Stoke has been confirmed. The Reds will face the Potters in the Women's National League Cup final on Saturday the 22nd of March at Warsaw's Bescot Stadium with a 3 p.m. kick-off. Do make sure to listen to Richard's chat with Adam in the 1865 Women's podcast, which entered your feed earlier this week. Finally, a bit about the men's team before the weekend's big match away at Newcastle United. Taiwo Awoniyi will be available after his absence due to concussion protocols, and Reds fans will be hoping that Hallam Hudson-Odoi is fit enough to return to the starting lineup. In other news, recent recruit from Reading, Tyler Binden, has won the Emerging Talent Prize at the ISPS Handa Holberg Awards as the top new sporting talent coming from New Zealand. Congratulations to you, Tyler. These are your top 5 stories from this week, and this has been Amilcar at the 1865 News Desk. Now it's back to Rich in the studio.
Thank you very much, Amilcar. So, Steve, let's get straight into some of those stories there. And just to start off with, 2 stories concerning our home, the world-famous City Ground. And the first one is talking about the redevelopment of the ground. Now, there'd been a lot of positivity a few weeks ago when it was reported, and we reported in a previous Friday 5, that Foster and Partners were going to get involved with the redevelopment of the ground. They were being consulted about how things could be moved forward. And of course, this came in the wake of Tom Cartledge not only relinquishing the chair of the club, chairmanship of the club, but also then leaving the board. And it has been confirmed by Danny Taylor in The Athletic that Benoy, Cartledge's firm, are no longer involved. Now, should we feel optimistic, pessimistic, neither nor? Do we know what's going on any more than we did a week ago?
This is just one of these things where it calls for patience again. I mean, it's something that's been dragging on for so long now. I seem to remember talking about this, pre-COVID, that we wanted to do some work on the stadium. Clearly, it's extremely complicated. I mean, in terms of interaction with Nottingham City Council, all of the interaction with the transportation bus companies, moving of the rowing club as well, all kinds of complications that feed into this. And I think as well, there was an article on The Athletic that were talking about the complications associated with flats that may not necessarily generate as much money as they expected to part fund the project. I think it's nice to see that this is still in the news. It's still something that's being talked about because it's something we desperately need in terms of more space at the City Ground. But I think I'm in the camp of, once I start seeing the stand come down, I think I'll believe it at that point.
Okay. And you mentioned there, obviously, there's loads of infrastructure factors that have to come in, public transport, funding for local schools and GP surgeries if we do put flats up because of the extra population who are living in the area, bus lanes and cycle lanes, new displays, and also as you mentioned, the boat club, which has been that long-standing issue there, that they will not only need to be moved but will require compensation. One of the things that is also coming up is that loads and loads of documents have been lodged with Rutcliffe Borough Council. They've had bat reports, they've had other kinds of archaeological studies. All these kinds of surveys have to be done, and then added into that, the fact is, the longer you wait on any kind of infrastructure project, the more expensive it is. So the estimated cost of a 3-tier 10,000-seater stand is now 130 million compared to 80 million when the plans were first announced, which, as you mentioned, was now over 6 years ago. Now, one thing that Danny Taylor does speculate, and I'm inclined to agree, is that because infrastructure spending doesn't come under PSR regs, it's one of those things where you can imagine that Evangelos Marinakis may well just say, you know what, it's an extra 50 million, I can take that if it makes the club better and therefore, makes the club more self-sufficient. What do you think?
I think he'll just go down the back of the sofa and see what loose change is down there. I think that will come in quite handy. But yeah, I think you're quite right. He's clearly invested in the club, clearly wants to put this club back in the biggest of stages. And everything that he's done so far is showing that he is a good steward and wants to, make sure that he leaves his mark with his tenure. So I would not be surprised if this continues to be pushed through as quick as possible.
And then the other elephant in the room was always the kind of the suggestion of moving the club from their current world famous ground to somewhere like Toton. And I mean, obviously that went down like a cup of cold sick with most fans, even the ones who actually live over that side of town. But bearing in mind all the kind of obstacles in the way, you can see why there'd be some logic to moving to an out of town location. I'm just wondering as well about the fact you can get a bigger ground. We've seen the photos of Everton's new stadium, so it's not case that all stadiums end up being like Pride Park made out of Lego and a landfill, you can get nice new stadiums, and it would mean that there's less worry in terms of having to play in half a ground for a season. There'd be more opportunity to make the club more kind of purpose-built with better facilities, including the corporate side. I mean, none of us want to see the club leave, but if it happened, I mean, could it still happen?
I think it's been talked about a lot less. I mean, I agree with you. I can definitely see the logic of a brand new stadium in a brand new location. I think one of the issues is the City Ground's location is just so unique. I remember when I first found out I was going to become a parent, the one thing that I wanted to do was carry my kids on their shoulders down the Trent to the football. And that location makes it very special. Now, I think had alternative locations been proposed that were, maybe further down the riverbank or, somewhere in that region, I think they probably would have got better support. But I think partly just moving out to Towton in the middle of nowhere essentially was never going to get good support. So yeah, I can see the logic of a completely new stadium logistically that makes it a lot more simple. But I'll for one be happy if we can manage to stay at the world famous City Ground.
Okay, and speaking of which, the second story is that it's been confirmed that England will be playing at the City Ground against Senegal on the 10th of June. And it'll be the first time that England have played on Trent side since 1941 when they beat Wales 4-1. A bit of a shame, really, that because Moussa Niakhaté has left the club, we no longer have any Senegalese players. So we could have had the prospect of seeing Forest players on both sides in that match. What odds a cheeky cap for Ryan Yates at the world famous City Ground?
Do you know what? That's maybe worth putting some money on that one. It would be nice to see, but it'd be great to see him actually push into the England squad. But yeah, you'd probably get quite long odds on that one.
Maybe Elliot Anderson's slightly more likely.
I think that is much more likely, but even more likely than that is seems to Gibbs White wearing the three lines on the City Ground.
But he's an England veteran by now, so
well, exactly.
Yeah, and obviously, personally, I'm quite surprised that City Ground has been chosen. It is a small ground. It is. It's down to the fact that Forest are not only an established Premier League club, but actually going great guns this season, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's good for the city. It's good for people that don't have opportunity to travel down to Wembley to see the national team. So I think it's a really good thing for us in Nottingham.
And the only thing that's a bit of a shame is, of course, there's going to be so many Forest fans who are also England supporters who won't be able to get in because of the way that ticketing is bound to work. There's no real capacity for priority for that many Forest fans, presumably, unless you want to pay hospitality prices.
Yeah, indeed. So expect this to be a future Friday 5 headline on the kerfuffle of people getting tickets for this later on in the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on. And another off-the-pitch story here is that co-owner of Nottingham Forest, Sokratis Kominakis, is no longer listed as a director of the club. Now, Kominakis is basically the silent partner in the takeover bid as a partner with Evangelos Marinakis. And, of course, there has been speculation that should Forest qualify for Europe, well, Olympiacos are in European competition every year, and there is this problem that UEFA won't allow clubs who are under the same ownership to compete in the same competitions. I have no idea where the Red Bull franchises stand on that, but of course, Man City and Girona, for example, they've had to come up with arrangements. Let's put it that way. And let's be honest, Man City are very good at coming up with arrangements. Mm-hmm. So the speculation is that Kominakis is maybe going to be listed as the sole owner of Olympiacos, and Marinakis will take sole ownership of Forest to prevent any kind of problems. Basically, Steve, this is a nice problem to have, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's certainly one we didn't dream of at the beginning of the season. I think I would have been happy with 16th or 17th again. But now I'm checking my passport and getting ready for European trips. So it makes logical sense that if they're doing this to ensure that the clubs are ready to go for next season going into Europe. Maybe some of the reasons behind this, but we could only speculate. But that seems like a logical conclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, obviously there have been changes to the board, including Cartledge leaving, Michael
Yeah.
Duggar coming in, and so on and so forth. I think really the most significant change is likely to be that of Lena Suluku, who's obviously coming as chief executive. And that does link back to our original story because the partner firm of Foster and Partners when it comes to stadium design is a firm that Suluku has worked with before when she was chief executive of Roma. So I think there's more significant parties involved in the day-to-day running of the club. The other thing I will just say, Steve, is that nice problem to have. UEFA regulations. What do you think about the fact that, there are several Red Bull clubs and Manchester City own several clubs? How does that work?
I think you'll always find that there are ways around these regulations. I'm sure Red Bull have done some very clever things in terms of their management, much in the same way that Forest and Olympiacos are so closely linked, and really on paper the link is being broken. So. Who knows? Who knows how they're getting around these things, and who knows how UEFA can look over them. So,
Especially as it seems that if this measure in terms of Kominakis no longer being a director of the club, it's essentially an administrative measure, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's not exactly rocket science. I'm no expert on company ownership, but it seems like a simple one, that.
Yeah, and I don't think Mr. Marinakis is going to be completely walking away from his responsibilities at Olympiacos either. So.
Probably not. Okay, so we'll come back in just a moment with the last two stories, and we'll start talking about and thinking about that Newcastle match that's coming up at the weekend. We'll do that after this.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Welcome back to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast, and our Friday 5 show with me, Rich Ferraro, and him, Steve Burns. So, Steve, just a quick one, because we've had a Forest Women's show which came into your feed on Thursday morning, which was talking to Adam about the progress of the women's team at the top of the league. But the news story that's broken since we recorded that is that the cup final date in the Women's National League Cup has been confirmed, with that taking place on the 22nd of March at the Bescot Stadium. Now, personally, for me, that sent a shiver down my spine because I've got terrible memories of going to watch the men's team playing at Walsall, who are a team who I can only describe as anti-football. But, of course, we're playing the really hot bed of football team Stoke City in this one, so it's going to be a completely different thing. But obviously, the women's team are going great guns in the league. The fact that they're in a cup final is going to be icing on the cake, isn't it?
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing up the ghost of Walsall. I'd forgotten all about that until you mentioned it. But you're right.
Runa Pedersen.
Yeah, bogey teams of the past. Let's start a list.
Gillingham.
Yeovil.
Watford.
Yeah, the pain. Let's move on to more positive things.
Yeah.
I think the move for Forest's women's team to become a professional team this season and full-time employed, I think has been such a positive move. And I think we're seeing that borne out now in the results. And, you mentioned top of the league, cup final. It couldn't really be going any better at this moment, could it?
Exactly. And I just think that, sometimes when you see people grumbling about, women's football's not as good, or who cares about that, then, it tends to be men of a certain age. And it's one of those things, isn't it? Actually, the younger generation really seem to love it. And Adam was talking about the fact that when you go to the women's games, actually, there are kids who are wearing the shirt with the women's players' names on the back. And that's a real exciting development for fans of Nottingham Forest, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And my daughter's been to a couple of the Forest women's games, absolutely loved them, came back buzzing. And I think also seeing role models on the pitch that this is a sport that she can engage with has been really positive.
And one of the things that's also really nice, and of course, we've heard a bit of controversy about it in the WSL because of security and player safety and everything. But one of the things that I love seeing after all the matches is on the socials, seeing the players going and signing shirts and signing programs and all of those kinds of things, and just engaging, particularly with the kids who are coming to watch those matches, because if no club's going to survive unless it's nurturing its fan base.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in terms of looking at where that Forest are in terms of the men's game now, it's been run at such a level with so many fans coming that fans don't really get that opportunity to engage with players in the same way. So, being able to engage with the players, chat to them after the game, get signatures, and I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on and let's move back to the men's team. We've talked about a lot of off the pitch things. Let's get back on the pitch. So the good news is that Taiwo Awoniyi will be available after his absence due to concussion protocols. I'm sure that, like me, you were very concerned when you saw him lolling around on the floor, thinking he'd really, really hurt himself. But it sounds like actually it was a precaution. It wasn't one of those things whereby he was definitely unconscious and definitely concussed. But it's one of those things where they were kind of saying, let's not take a risk. And also, he'll probably have to wear a mask. So we'll have two players in masks, as Nico Williams still seems to be wearing his. Also, Callum Hudson-Odoi might well be back. He came back, obviously, in the match against Fulham. He showed how much we'd missed him. I mean, I'm sure that, Taiwo's not going to play from the start, but I'm sure you're hoping that Callum's going to be able to do so.
Yeah, I think that the balance of the team, once Callum came back on against Fulham, you could see that players knew where they need to be, what their responsibilities were. It felt like a better fit again, particularly against Fulham's attack. I think it's very encouraging that he's back. And also, we've talked many a time about what would happen if Chris Wood was injured, what would happen if Taiwo was injured for a long period of time. Knowing that Taiwo is starting to come back to a little bit of March sharpness and fitness. For him to have been out for several weeks with the facial injury would have just been pretty much would have finished his season off. So the fact he's able to come back so quickly is a huge positive for us as a club.
Yeah, and the poor guy's had a rough time, and just as it looked like he was coming back into some kind of, like you say, looking sharper, fitter. It was a nice, easy one to come onto, but when Nico Williams scored that goal against Brighton, that was Taiwo getting back to the Taiwo that we love, blundering through, actually making the keeper work for it at the end, physical presence, speed, just a bit of power, something that frankly no other centre-forward in the Premier League can offer.
And the finish he did against Exeter, that was a really good kind of turn and hit, again showing what he's capable of doing. So yeah, I'm glad he's not out for too long, and hopefully, we'll see him back, tearing up the pitch for us.
Okay. Just another line that Amilcar brought us, which is that Tyler Binden, who obviously was signed from Reading but kept him on loan there for the rest of the season, has won the Emerging Talent Prize at the ISPS Handa Hallberg Awards, which no one outside of New Zealand has heard of. But it is a recognition of the top sporting talent coming from that country. And he kind of beat off the competition from 5 other young sports people in other sports. Chris Wood was nominated in the Senior Prize. So that's a good recognition of somebody who actually, although he is, he's been kept on loan at Reading, it sounds as though there's a good chance that they'll want him to be part of the first team setup. He is established international, even at 20 years of age. Despite being young, he's got a good degree of experience in several different countries, and he's coming from a sporting family, so he knows what it takes to succeed. So that's one for the future. Now, let's talk about the Newcastle match, because before the Fulham match, I kind of anticipated that Nuno would stick with 3 at the back because of the way that Fulham attack, their kind of attacking quadrant, and the fact that they'll put lots of crosses in. And I thought, well, maybe that's why they'll want that extra security in the centre of defence. But it left us so exposed on the wings. Nuno admitted it was a mistake afterwards. What do you think he's going to do on Sunday against Newcastle?
I think it's more likely to go to the 4 at the back again. I think that gives us more, like you said, it gives us more balance, particularly on the wings, particularly if Callum's fit. I think that will make a big difference there. I think the challenge we've got is which version of Newcastle is going to turn up. Mm-hmm. You have the version that was battered a few weeks ago, and then you get the version of Newcastle that turned up at the City Ground and just turned us inside out. So it'll be interesting to see which how Newcastle themselves play. I think what's interesting is a few weeks ago, I wasn't particularly scared of playing anybody. And we've had this little bit of a wobble now. And I'm now looking at the teams around us, like the Newcastles and the Manchester Cities and the Arsenals that we've got to play. And I'm seeing how their game's progressing. And it's getting me more and more worried from time to time, particularly when we have these wobbles, thinking of Fulham and the 5-0 loss a couple of weeks ago. So hopefully we go back to something that the team feel confident with. It looks like everybody's about fit. So, yeah, hopefully the 4 at the back with the 2 wingers will be a good move.
And who would you select in central midfield?
Well, there's a question, isn't there? I think I'll probably go for Dominguez at the moment. I don't think that Sangare coming back in has looked particularly sharp. And I think it's the same for Danilo. I think he's still looking a little bit off the pace. I think Anderson is essential. He just has that ability to turn and links up so well with Gibbs White. So I think in that kind of holding place, probably Dominguez at the moment, just for his energy. And then failing that, Ryan Yates to come on and kick some people really and just cause a bit of havoc in midfield. So I think I'll probably lean towards either Dominguez as Yates or Yates, but probably Dominguez at this stage.
Mm-hmm. And actually, we touched upon it in terms of speculating he might play for his country, but Anderson has actually quietly become one of the most important components of this team, hasn't he? And we didn't necessarily expect he'd be playing in the kind of 6/8 role, but he does seem to be a good fit there, and he does seem to be. It's one of those things whereby when Forest do well, it's because the midfield's doing well, and when they do badly, it's because the midfield is like a Swiss cheese.
Yeah, and you heard the Newcastle fans saying when he joined us that they were gutted that he was going because of the level of potential. I think I was, as many fans were not quite sure how you were going to fit him and Gibbs White into the same team. But with him dropping that little bit deeper, his vision and ability to actually start off those counter-attacks has been just pivotal to the way that we've designed our attacks this year. He's been a fantastic signing, certainly one of the many candidates we've got for player of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just finally, as I mentioned at the very, very start, just to go back to one of those topics that isn't really in the news, but we can't really ignore. Tonight, as we're recording this, Billy Davies is doing his event at the Albert Hall. We'll be getting our guys who are at the event to report back in due course, and we will see what they have to say and whether they've enjoyed their evening with Billy Davies. And as there's nowhere else we can go from there, I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us, Steve Burns. Thank you to Amilcar at the news desk, and also thank you, as always, listener, for joining us. If you haven't as yet, do go back into our feeds, check out several shows that we've had recently, as well as our match reports. We've had Football Terrorists, we've had our women's show, and of course, we also had our special show, which was a retrospective part 1 of the review of the 1994-95 season, when Forest obviously had not long got promoted and then qualified for Europe. So if you have nostalgia for those days, or if you are too young to remember, then trust me, it's a great listen. And we're talking to the likes of Mark Crosley and David Phillips, and hearing a few snippets of music and a few bits of commentary in there. So do check it out. We'll be back after the Newcastle game with our match report. In the meantime, come on you Reds.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.